I started writing for the Daily News. My claim to fame was I did a 2-page spread called How to Be a Social Climber in New York City. And it was like a Monopoly game. If you met so-and-so, you got 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, went to that restaurant, went to that school, all these things. It was quite fabulous. Yeah. It came out this Sunday. On Monday morning, John Fairchild, who I hadn't met, called me and said, you got to come work for Women's Wear Daily. I want you to meet my editor, Patrick McCarthy. Then suddenly, Susie, Mrs. Maley, after 25 years on the Daily News, is hired by the New York Post, and there is scrambling at Daily News. Liz Smith got me the job. She said, there are too many women doing gossip columns. You got to get a boy. He knows these people. He knows the young. And so I began, and I went from no one knew me to 1,200 words a day, 6 days a week, with my little face on top of the column. It was explosive. So Patrick took me to lunch and offered me the job of being the eye editor. And I said, no, I think I'm going to go to the Daily News. He said, are you the new Susie? Because it was a big thing in media. And I said, yeah, I guess. Next day, new Susie. And I was launched.
I'm Jill Demling, and this is Going Rogue. Today's guest is Billy Norwich. For nearly 4 decades, Billy has captured New York society with a rare combination of wit and compassion. First as a gossip columnist for the Daily News and Post, then as an editor at Vogue for over 2 decades. He's written about everyone from socialites to celebrities, always choosing to compose rather than expose. When Anna Wintour told him to edit your life, it became his guiding philosophy. Billy believes in what he calls the anthropology of style. He spent his career observing that quiet people are the ones you want to love and know. He's mastered the art of turning scattered thoughts into elegant prose. He's the author of 2 novels, including My Mrs. Brown, and his wisdom includes perfect advice for our time. Give time, time. Today we're giving time, as Billy Norwich goes rogue. Hi, Billy.
Hi, Jill. It's been too long.
I know.
I love that work gives us an excuse to talk to each other.
I know. I was thinking, when's the last time I saw him? And I remember one time, I think after I left, we met for breakfast or something.
We had lunch at that nice place on Bleecker Street. Yeah.
Exactly. I think I was like, I need some wise wisdom from the wisest person I know.
The avuncular. Yeah.
But anyway, before we dive in, I know I texted you this, but I want to tell the listeners as well how I've become obsessed with asking my AI, who I call Al, sometimes Big Al, if he's nice, to pull tarot cards for me on various subjects, most frequently about going rogue and each guest I have on. The first time I did it, the card that came up was the Magician. And I believe that you're the magician because you spent a lifetime turning observation into alchemy. You can take a room full of strangers and render them legible. You can take something as ephemeral as style and translate it into anthropology. I actually did a poll the day before yesterday around whether you were the magician I've been looking for. The first card was the Star, which speaks to hope, destiny, and a guiding light. The second was the Magician, which is all about mastery of craft, turning ideas into alchemy. And the third was the Six of Cups, which is all about a tender connection to the past. The cards confirmed to me that you're both a force of destiny and a heartfelt link to the kind of storytelling I want to preserve.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I better brush my teeth, Jill. I'll be right back.
Okay, so along with being the magician, you've also said a lot of things that capture your philosophy, and I call them Billyisms. Ooh. So here are some of my favorite Billyisms. A new dress, a lipstick, a cologne was an intervention. Quiet people are the ones you want to love and know. Mm. I love to write about the anthropology of style. Mm-hmm. Give time to do its healing. I realized I didn't have to be possessed by possessions. The wild kingdom between the ears. He who conquers himself is greater than he who conquers a city. Life hurts without hope, and cynicism, once a luxury, becomes unaffordable. So I want to go deeper on two of these Billyisms. Both are quotes from 2016 when you were promoting My Mrs. Brown. He who conquers himself is greater than he who conquers a city, which was your answer to what's your motto, and Wild Kingdom Between the Ears. While promoting My Mrs. Brown in 2016, you did an interview with WWD, which reads, 20 years after he published Learning to Drive, Norwich said he is amazed to have written a novel in 2016. Quote, just getting a simple sentence together from a very dizzy mind was always kind of a challenge. They don't come out simple. Sometimes they don't even parse. I call it the kingdom between the ears. So, can we first talk about what both of these mean as they relate to you personally, if they are connected, and specifically with the kingdom between the ears? When did this shift happen? Was it always like this for you, or just after publishing Learning to Drive in 1996? Does it have to do with quieting your mind? Because I feel the quieter it is around me, the louder it is inside of me. And I can't meditate, which is something you talk about. You said there are no bad meditations. They all work once you realize it is the breathing, not the thinking or stopping thinking, that brings the physiological benefits from meditating. This business of stopping one's thoughts, impossible. You sit, you breathe.
I personally would not have connected those two quotes, but as you were speaking just now, Jill, I did connect them, and I think this is what has manifested in the Wild Kingdom Between My Ears. As a kid, I was frivolous and creative and sensitive, and we'll probably talk about it. It was a tough time. But in terms of school, there were challenges, hand-eye coordination. Now, I did well in soccer, but I can't play baseball. I missed the ball. I was on the tennis team at the boarding school I went to, and they threw me off the tennis team. You have great form, but you keep missing the ball. And I have terrible in college boards. I assume the scores are still the same. I got a 800 in English and a 290 in math. Now, the lowest you can get is 300, but when there was a concern by the college board people that the family should know that the kid's lacking, that's why they gave me the 290. But I went through all those years. I am not a proper dyslexic. I reverse letters and things. So there's a little something going on in the brain. Yeah. God willing, the next novel from Simon & Schuster's Atria will be my third published novel. It will be the 11th novel that I have written and tried to get out there in the world. I mean, I was writing novels in high school, and we did a lot of writing. I went to the master's program, fine arts, creative writing at Columbia. And one of my teachers, bless her heart, was the very wonderful Miss Elizabeth Hardwick. Miss Hardwick to me, never said call me Elizabeth. One of the things she had to do was read a novel, and that would be my senior thesis. And she read it, and she asked to see me, and she smoked True Blue cigarettes, and she lit a cigarette, and she had a divine Southern accent. She said, Billy, where did you go to school before graduate school?
Right.
I said, well, Miss Hardwick, I went to something called Pomfret School, and then I went to a finishing school in Florence, Italy, English speaking. And I said, and then I went to Hampshire College. Oh, my dear Billy, you've never had a class in grammar and construction, have you? And I said, what do you mean, Miss Hardwick? And she said, well, can you even diagram a sentence? And I said, no, Miss Hardwick, I never had that in school. And her response was, when I left the hallowed halls of Columbia that day, when I got to the corner, they used to have this box that said the Learning Annex, free courses or almost free courses. She said, you'll find a course in English and grammar for foreign-born people. Go take that course. So I'd gone through all that schooling. And as I was taking that course and actually loving what I was learning, it occurred to me that I had a problem in terms of construction, and it was visual. It was a cognitive thing that wouldn't have been diagnosed back in the dark ages when I was growing up. So I took it upon myself to incorporate that in my preparation for my work. I assisted someone named Eugenia Shepard. Every year, the Council of Fashion Designers of America, if it's still called that, gives the Eugenia Shepard Fashion Journalism Award, and I was her assistant. Bless her heart. And she had to do 1,000 words a day by 12:30. And we got those words together. And then I got a column, and I had to write 1,200 words a day, 6 days a week for the Daily News first, and then 2 years later for the New York Post. And I struggled to meet the deadlines, but I did it. I mean, the focus, the fear,
Right.
a deadline to me is you 1 millimeter off this line and some motherfucker's going to shoot you and kill you. Then, when I started to do more longer form, I started to notice I wrote in the conditional tense. And particularly in the fiction, I go through my stuff and it will say, he might open the door. I'm so insecure.
Wow. You hadn't noticed that.
Never. And I think that it was a very humbling experience. I mentioned the graduate school. I was in school with some really remarkable young writers, including Susan Minot, Mona Simpson, Patty Dan, Beverly D'Onofrio, and the list goes on. Yeah. And they were banging out stuff all the time. They were doing great. They had their own issues with their own writing, and I don't know what those are, really. Yeah. Writing is not the easiest thing in the world. I mean...
Especially if the Wild Kingdom.
And especially without a trust fund. Because you have these day jobs. When I got the galley of learning to drive, I cried. Because the way it was structured was basically structured because that's what I could do on a weekend per chapter. I could write a chapter a weekend. I couldn't sit around and write the whole thing. And now that I'm somewhere between employed and unemployed in my dotage, I have a lot of time and I'm having a very hard time focusing.
I read something you said that now you don't stop at a chapter.
Yes.
The best way for you is just keep going. Sit down. Do not stop when the chapter's done if your brain's still...
That's right. If it's 3 a.m., I should stop. I will stop in the middle of some action because I'll know what I mean, and I'll write a note to myself, and then he will open the door. So all of these things that I learned, my shortcomings, if you will, and I had a lot of them in terms of how I related to people, my possessiveness, my melancholy, all these things that really would need to be addressed as the years went on. The expression, he who conquers himself is greater than he who conquers a city, is not original. And I read it in some 12-step literature. And it killed me. It flawed me. Because, my God, I grew up. My father had a heart attack when I was 9 and died on my birthday. So that got my attention. And my mother was already sickly. And long story short, after being in a coma for 2 years in the facility, she died when I was 19. But after my father died, I remember at his funeral at the Shiva, my relatives saying, and I wasn't supposed to hear, what's Billy going to do when Leah, my mother's name, dies? And they didn't mean spiritually.
Right.
They meant financially.
Right.
They weren't going to help. I got that message. And what was I going to do?
Instead of what are we going to do?
They said, what are we going to do? And again, I grew up not knowing how to diagram a sentence. You think I knew? I'll tell you a story. My mother was still alive when I went to this boarding school. I went there because she was quite ill, and it was the idea then that you remove the child from the bad situation. And so off I went to this big waspy boarding school where the first day they said to me, what sports do you like? And oh, by the way, you're the 13th Jew to ever, Jewish. But they didn't say Jew in the old days because that was not politically correct. You said Jewish person. You're the 13th Jewish person to come here in the history of the Pomfret School. If you have any special needs, let us know. So it was a very different world.
Wow.
Well, I did apparently have special needs, which was an accounting class, because when I went to the school, I was told to clean my room before I went off to boarding school the first time, and I had all this loose change. So I took all the loose change and threw it in the garbage. And my mother found out about that, and she called no more and no less than the headmaster and said, I'm worried about this kid, because she grew up in the Depression. Right. So my point is, fear of financial insecurity propelled me through many years. Whether I was washing the dishes while I was going to Columbia or going to the graduation at Columbia in that program and going through the line and being given an envelope, which was a bill for the rest of my tuition. You know, and Susan Minot, forgive me, Same thing, same restaurant, except she was a waitress. And my point is self-will, ambition. I mean, being all those things that you might call a handicap, I was ambitious from the get-go. And
Survival.
survival, absolutely. I used to keep a brown bag under my bed, and it was underwear, kinky. And I would say to my mother, if I didn't like something, she said, I'd go and get the, I'm going to New York. I'm going to New York. And finally, someone must have told her to let him. I mean, New York was 3 hours away.
Right.
And so I got to the door. It was winter. And she said, it's very windy in New York City. You might want to bring a jacket. So these things, at least I had a sense of humor. My point is, by the time I was 40 years old, I was exhausted and something had to give. I published Learning to Drive. I was incredibly disappointed in the results. I know you know this story, but in those days before Amazon, before digital means of social media to move your lurch, you really relied on other things, and Publishers Weekly was the most formidable outlet for a book and for selling a book. And they did reviews, anonymous reviews, not signed, a few handful of months before the book came out, so that we only had independent bookstores in those days, so they could order it in Podunk. So the review came out and it said, I can quote it, "This book is so bad it'll put your teeth on edge." That meant no one bought the book. But then, whenever the book came out, several weeks later, the first review was at Entertainment Weekly where they gave it an A. And it went like that. So I didn't know, am I the greatest thing in the universe, or am I the greatest piece of shit in the center of the universe? Excuse my swearing. And I basically had a breakdown eventually, promoting that book, and I got sober by accident. I just didn't want to have hangovers anymore. And I found the best cure for hangovers was to abstain, to not have a hangover. That's what I learned in my 12-step experience. But I needed to clean up my side of the street. I needed to somehow manifest, develop more responsibility. I was responsible because I had to be, but I now wanted to be responsible because I had been given, despite myself, many, many gifts. So I wanted to somehow clean up my side of the street. And therefore, if I could conquer myself, rather than become the editor-in-chief of Brides magazine and get a better car to go around in, I realized that my satisfaction would come from that. And to a great extent, it has. I mean, I'm proud of my work, but I'm prouder of the fact that I compete with myself and not you.
There's a lot there. And we're going to circle back. You've told your own story in what I call Cliff Notes. So instead of having you retell your whole story, since you've told it many times, I'm going to read the Cliff Notes, and I will read your words. I was born Billy Goldberg in Norwich, Connecticut. My father died when I was 9. My mother, after a long illness, slipped into a coma when I was 17 and died 2 years later. I didn't have siblings. Despite money concerns aplenty, I managed to borrow funds and get my undergraduate degree at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts. I moved to New York City in 1976 and taught school for a couple of years before attending Columbia University's MFA writing program. I took out more college loans and waited on tables and washed dishes until I was lucky enough to get a job assisting in the office of the late fashion writer and columnist Eugenia Shepard. This led to my first job and my own byline as a journalist, writing an Around the Town column for the Daily News for 6 years and then the New York Post for 2 years. I next worked as an editor and writer at Vogue, with the exception of the years 1999 to 2004, when I wrote and edited the New York Times. In 2011, I left Vogue to edit books for Fight and Press. You are the author of the novel Learning to Drive, published in 1996, a children's book called Molly and the Magic Dress, That I Need to Get Story, published in 2002, and My Mrs. Brown, out 2016. So that's the resume, but I want to understand the human being behind it. Through the conversations I've had on this show, I've realized that many, if not all, of my guests knew at a very young age what they wanted to be, almost as if the profession had called them.
Mm-hmm.
Half were encouraged by their parents to pursue their dreams, and the other half had to go it alone.
Mm-hmm.
Orlando Pita being fascinated by hair and not knowing why, cutting his substitute teacher's hair at 14. A 10-year-old Mickey Boardman seeing Vogue for the first time in the aisle at the supermarket, and not really knowing what it was, not knowing what he wanted to be, but he wanted glamour.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked about a well-received second grade poem about how a bird actually flew into your school, cemented your plans to be a writer. Did you feel that calling to be a writer, or was it the positive reaction to your poem that made you yearn for more? And what were your parents' role in it? Did they encourage the writing? At 9, your father dies. You've written, when I started writing at age 9, actually, I was very wordy and very emotional. So wordy that even I didn't like the writing and I'd get quite lost. When answering the innocent question, what did your 8-year-old self love doing? You answered, was a sad year, I'm afraid. I loved spending time with my father those months before he died. From personal experience, I know nowadays that child psychologists and psychiatrists often recommend journaling to help children process confusing feelings, providing a private space to express themselves without relying on another person's trust. So I know we're talking years before all of this research on coping mechanisms for grief and for children, but I'm wondering if the writing helped during those periods of time. Did your mom encourage it for that reason, or none of the above?
I have an answer for you, and it's coming out in an order that I wouldn't have guessed. I have to be honest and say I craved attention from the get-go. But when would this...
Because this was before your father passed.
Right.
I'll just read the other quote that I have. At 9, your father dies. You've written, when I first started writing age 9, I was very wordy and very emotional. So wordy that even I didn't like the writing and I'd get quite lost. And then when answering a question, what did your 8-year-old self love doing when you were doing press in 2016? You said, was a sad year, I'm afraid. I loved spending time with my father those months before he died. So then I was thinking, kids that go through traumatic events or are depressed. I have experience with this, knowing that writing is something also that child therapists suggest, a safe place to keep a diary. So all of this is bundled up in those 2 years. So maybe just putting it all to you, and then you can kind of
we did not have child therapists that I'm aware of in Goldberg, Connecticut. We did not have grief and dying counselors in Goldberg, Connecticut, if they even existed. I'm not even sure, bless her heart, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was publishing, because she really is the mother of grief therapies. I mean, I had costumes as a child. There was somewhere in a box in a suitcase, I have a picture of me as a little king.
This makes sense.
Yeah. And the only child. And my father was 60 when I was born, and my mother 40. And they hadn't been married that long. Both of them were in charge of their families, their siblings. And so they got all their siblings going, and then there was pressure on them to marry, and so they were introduced. I mean, they lived down the street from each other, but they didn't know each other. And anyway, so I was like a big deal. I was the youngest in my generation. My father came from Russia with his father from Russia. My mother was from a long line of Scottish Jews, so she said many things to me when I was growing up, including, eat your dinner, remember your poor starving relatives in Glasgow, because there used to be a Jewish ghetto in Glasgow. Anyway, so I wasn't really writing. I also didn't like to read. I had one favorite book. It was called Mickey Mouse's Picnic. It was a golden book. And I really read nothing until I was 11 when Portnoy's Complaint came out by Mr. Philip Roth. And I begged my mother to let me read it, and she did. And then I started to read voraciously. So I missed all the kids' literature.
Right.
I liked acting. I loved the idea of that. My mother and I used to watch the Academy Awards. And there's something I'll just insert here now. So my mother was sickly from the time I was 7, and she really didn't get to go out much. We had a store in Connecticut, I don't know if it's still there, called G. Fox and Company. And G. Fox and Company had a blue truck. And if you saw something in the New York Times on Sunday, you could call up G. Fox, and if they had the dress, or I remember Estee Lauder invented herself something called Youth Do, which was, I believe, her first famous product. And all the Jewish ladies were thrilled to support Estee Lauder all around the world, and everyone bought Youth Do. But it would come in the truck on Tuesdays and Thursdays to Goldberg. They hate it in Norwich, Connecticut when I call it Goldberg. It would come, and when I noticed, like my mother didn't put it on and then go to a party. She ordered really fancy clothes. I remember an amazing black cashmere coat with a big sable collar. She never wore it. She was not well enough to wear it, but it would come and it would be unzipped. She'd try it on at home.
Yeah. Which is the best part, let's be real.
That's right.
Trying it on.
Yeah. And for me, I saw fashion, style, because we moved houses into the passion and of decorating as an intervention. So that when I heard Pauline Trégère at the CFDA Awards say, feeling blue, wear red, that was my childhood. That was my entire childhood. Now, about writing. So I thought I wanted to become an actor, and I don't remember any memories until I went to boarding school, where I did a lot of acting. I remember being in a play called The Adding Machine by Elmer Rice, and I played the part of Sherdloo. And Sherdloo was a small part, but an important part. And Sherdloo, which I'm saying wrong, he was going to trial because he had slit his mother's throat with a knife. Now, wasn't that the perfect first thing? And I got to that point, and I think I did something funny, because I can to this day remember the laughter from the front row of that school auditorium all the way to the back and back again. And I thought, I'm going to be an actor.
Well, that's funny. Look, when you thought you were going to be a writer, because you remembered the specific poem that got applause.
So I ended up the president of that drama society. But I always suspected I wasn't a very good actor. Nothing's going to stop me.
Right.
Then I went to the school in Italy. There's a school still exists, the American School of Switzerland, TASIS, and it's in Lugano. And it was ran by a woman named Mary Fleming, Mrs. Fleming. Ooh, she was glamorous. And for a while, she had a junior college in a 16th century villa off the Viale Michelangelo in Florence. And I didn't get into any colleges. I was on the waiting list everywhere I applied, the Ivy Leagues. But then the recruiter came around, and it was really expensive in those days. We had a little bit of money left from my father. After my mother's illness, it was gone.
Your mom was sick.
Yeah.
So it's not like she's working.
Right. And she left a peculiar estate. Everyone would think I was going to be this very privileged, rich kid. But that's not how it worked out. I didn't inherit anything from my mother, even the house. Long story longer, I go off to the school, and it was the most exquisite experience. I mean, it was fancy. The January term was joining the kids at the American School in Switzerland for a 6-week winter experience in St. Moritz, where we'd ski in the morning and then have a nice lunch and then do our classes. Point is, while I was in Italy, it occurred to me to launch a newspaper. For Americans, there was no English-speaking thing, called Topolino, Mickey Mouse. And
your favorite book.
Right. And the first thing I did was write about some scandal at the Elizabeth Barrett Browning Foundation near the Ponte Vecchio. And within minutes after that thing came out, I ended up having to go to the American Consul and apologize in front of the Consul General. So I was like, this is fabulous. Oh, I'd never do it again, I said. But it began.
It began.
A couple of things. So I want to finish this track. Throughout that, when my father died, in my mother's drawer, I found a letter, a beautifully, beautifully written letter to my mother, wishing her all Godspeed. English was his second language, and although he took it seriously, he never quite mastered it. he said, and for my son, my greatest hope is that he will become a writer and he will be able to tell you how much I love you and how much he loves you. And through my life, I kept that letter with me. Wait for it. I kept that letter with me forever. And then at about age 40 that year, I couldn't find the letter. Still had the box that it was in. I couldn't find the letter. Some 20, 25 years later, I'm listening to Mrs. Cooper to me, Gloria Vanderbilt Cooper, Anderson's mother, Anderson Cooper. They wrote a book on grief. And Mrs. Cooper talked about the letter that her father wrote her, a very similar letter. And then she realized that it had been a dream, a reoccurring dream. There was no letter. There was no letter. I made it up. And in another part of the world, 4 hours away in New York City, Gloria Cooper had made up a similar thing. And I wouldn't have known that. I'm eternally grateful for that.
Wow.
But you talk about having to conquer yourself.
Yes.
I mean, there went my story.
Well, you have to look at yourself first.
Yeah.
Before you can conquer yourself, right?
And one other thing about style and fashion and gossip columns, tabloid writing. After my father died, my mother didn't like to cook and she wasn't well. So we would go to a place called Friendly's. They were all over New England. I think you know.
Of course. I grew up in Boston.
I know. So Friendly's, it was a big deal, right?
Yeah, it was a big deal. That's where we met the guys from Wayland.
Right.
It
And
was right on the town line.
yeah, I would go with my mother after she'd pick me up at school and we'd go to Friendly's and I would have a tuna melt or a hamburger and Diet Coke. But there was like a sliding door from the Friendly's into, it was a little bit of a strip mall, into the drugstore. And the drugstore sold the New York tabloids, and my mother read everything. When I was growing up, she was subscribing to Woman's Wear Daily. It came in the mail days later.
Wow.
I mean, she loved this stuff.
Yeah.
And she'd be reading the front page and everything. And let's say she was going to move on. There were a lot of newspapers in those days.
Yeah, of course. It makes sense, Billy, just inserting with someone that is sickly and you're getting to see what's happening, get into it as if that's all. When you read gossip, you're kind of pretending you're in it.
Well, that's it.
She did. So I can see why she would.
I don't know that my mother loved the columns, but I found someone named Susie Says. Now, do you remember Aileen Maley? You probably knew her when she wrote for W, but she, in social chronicling, I think he might have started in the Depression. There was someone called Charlie Knickerbocker. And he was Maury Paul. And then he died, and Ole Cassini's brother, Gigi Cassini, did it. Liz Smith got her start by assisting Mr. Cassini. And then Charlie died, and Mrs. Maley, who was already writing in Miami for the Miami paper about social life, they hired Mrs. Maley, and she was a damn good writer. And in those days, she didn't get items. It was sports writing. She went out at night. She covered a bunch of different teams and leagues, and then she woke up in her case, at lunchtime, and wrote what they did last night. Yeah. And then I got to read it in Podunk and became this fascinating alternative to my life, coupled with the fact, I know you know this story, Vogue used to be twice a month in those days. And they used a lot of illustration, fashion illustration. And one of my mother's nieces, her professional name was Ann R. Goodman. She did freelance fashion illustration for Vogue for many, many years. And it would have been around the early 60s. I think The Bikini and The Pill came out in the same year. And I think it was 1961. Changed the world. Yeah. So Cousin Bunny, again, may she rest in peace, would come and visit my mother somewhat frequently from New York. Again, it was about a 3-hour train trip. And I remember seeing her and not knowing who this creature was. She was gorgeous. She looked like, do you ever see Valley of the Dolls, the movie? I can't remember her name.
A long time ago.
Yeah, she had beautiful brown hair, thick, down. Not like where we were, velvets. Natural hair, maybe a base, but no makeup to speak of. She wore capri pants, black, with a little slit above, Calvin. Yeah. Ballet shoes. This was how they looked in those days. Poor boy, a ribbed T-shirt, black. big, thick, I'm going to call it a Verdura charm bracelet, and a big old satchel, inside of which was a Yorkshire Terrier. And she would come up, I think, to get advice from my mother. She couldn't talk to her parents. And my mother, who didn't perhaps need or care about the pill, or was certainly not going to wear a bikini, probably thought they were the greatest thing that ever happened. She was all about the youthquake. They called it the youthquake in those days. And then one day, it gets even better for me. So I was born wearing eyeglasses. And in those days, you were ostracized for wearing eyeglasses. Like you were some Poindexter, they called me. I'd go walking, Poindexter, Poindexter. She's sitting there, and she goes, excuse me. She takes something out of her eye and puts it in her mouth and puts it back in her eye. She was wearing like the first iteration of contact lenses. They were hard, and you could wet them in your mouth to get them to not be drying your eye. I said, what's that? And she explained it politely.
Yeah.
And I vowed, come hell or high water, I was going to do two things. I was going to move to New York City, where the contact lenses are, and little dogs. And I was going to work at Vogue.
Wow.
Just like Bunny. But as a writer and an editor, I didn't know what an editor was. So in a long-winded answer to your question, that's what happened. And when I got to Vogue in particular, I evolved there. We loved our Laurie Jones. I mean, this marvelous woman who you'd hear her say, bless his heart, they were getting fired. I learned about the Southern dialects through her. She once came to me and said, something was going on. It was kind of like a big deal. And she said, sometimes I think you're the only one here with a soul.
And what I remember her saying to me was, Anna asked me to speak to you because she feels you inundate her with ideas.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I won't send any ideas to a magazine that publishes every month.
Right. Exactly. Oh, I know. I thought about it. And did you know who Mrs. Exeter was at Vogue when they brought her back? Mrs. Exeter is a character in Vogue, what the older ladies are going to wear. That goes back to the 1920s. And I hadn't discovered Mrs. Exeter. I went through all those years editing People Are Talking About. Did you know I did that? Yeah. Doing all that stuff. But I never came across Mrs. Exeter, particularly even when we did the 100th anniversary issue of Vogue. And that's what people had a big blowout of the history of Vogue and Vogue Speak. But I was at the New York Times, and I came upon an old article by Charlotte Curtis mentioning Mrs. Exeter, because one of my favorite movies is called Mrs. Miniver with Greer Garson, if I'm correct. I wanted to be the post-20th century Mrs. Exeter, and against all the rules of the New York Times, I wrote to Anna. I said, do you know who Mrs. Exeter is? To which I think she wrote back, I said, I am the editor of Vogue. Of course I know who Mrs. Exeter was. And so I started doing it with Sally Singer and Bess Rattray, who you may recall, editing it, and no one ever knew. But what I would do is I would call all the ladies I knew, including, I think I can say this.
If that wasn't the Modern Manners.
No, I had so many columns. Mrs. Exeter appeared in the fashion section, View, with an illustration, and she always was giving advice. The advice was basically, there's fashion, style, Christmas presents are all in reinvention. Life is hard. Oh, you're broke this year? Then get some decent stationery and write a letter to the people you love. That'll matter a lot more than a hat. So that's really my background and where the voice comes from, I think.
Okay, so it's one thing I'll say, funny not to digress.
Please.
Further, is that I've had two writers on, Jonathan Van Meter and Adam Green, and both wanted to be actors. So there is something, and I tied it together with Jonathan as we were talking, because it is a performance. I mean, when you're interviewing someone, I can't necessarily connect the two if you're writing a novel or a memoir of sorts, but the interview process, you do have to step into whoever is going to be the best counterpart to who you're interviewing, right?
Absolutely. Writing is performative, and then if you're lucky and you get to read your writing, that becomes incredibly performative. A lot of writers develop this marvelous shtick when they go to read their poetry, and you can listen to the old guard, the Carl Sandburgs and the E.E. Cummings, and my favorite writer in the world is someone named Stevie Smith, a British poet. a very similar story of her growing up. Anyway, just beautiful. And to hear Stevie Smith or to see a clip of her reading was like, oh my God, Eileen Atkins, eat your heart out.
Okay, we pretty much went over Mother's lesson, fashion is medicine. You talked about the first interventions. Let me just read this question. When you say fashion, a new dress, a lipstick, a cologne was an intervention. You just touched on that. You learned this from your mother, but it seems writing was your first intervention. 2 interventions in one household. Your mother was fashion, you with words. Were you both just trying to stay afloat? What were you and your mother teaching each other about using beauty to survive? And then I also want to know the logistical part of those years, because at 7, at 9, it's not like you're really understanding that. Even understanding death, Mickey Mouse lives forever, so you're never going to learn about life and death from him. But was there preparation? Like when you went off to school, did you understand? And I know it's hard to know what you knew then and what you know now, and you didn't have much choice, but you would think if you had a choice, you would have wanted those years with her, right?
Yeah.
But then she knows she's sick. I had a terminally ill father. He was in a hospice for 18 months. A lot of that was his selfishness of wanting us to think he was going to die any day. And that is a whole other thing to talk to you about, is that pause, right? You're pausing your life. Maybe
Yes.
that was also a reason to force you to be out of that, because you're consumed with that.
Yep.
I mean, it's your last parent. You're young. Like, I'd hug my mom in bed while she watched Falcon Crest, thinking, if I hug you and never let go, you cannot die.
Yes.
That's what I thought. And that's without another parent's death. That's just, the fear was always there for me.
Of course.
I know it's a lot of stuff altogether, but I
Yeah.
think talking to you, it's easier to do it that way because it is all kind of mixed together.
No, I see.
But like logistically,
Yeah, I'll tell you.
what was set up for you?
I'll tell you. My mother meant incredibly well. She was very funny. Her best friend worked at the bookstore in town. And Aunt Sandra, not blood related. Where I grew up in Connecticut, forgive me the pretentiousness of how aunt sounds, but that's what you said. That's a regionalism.
Yes.
I can't say Aunt Sandra. I don't know how
I
to.
say aunt because I was from California, but in Boston, it was aunt.
Oh, see, good. Oh, good. It was New England, right?
Yeah, New England. Yeah.
Yeah. She would come on Tuesdays for dinner, and she would bring my mother a few books. And my mother then spent the rest of the week reading the books. That's all she did. At one point, she went to Weight Watchers, and all we had for a year was broiled whitefish and occasionally a rotisserie chicken. But when she bought the everything was good in those days. Yeah. I was 11 and I was given diet pills. That's because anything that got invented was good for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Sunbathing, fabulous. So that was the routine. And she would pick me up at school. But then, right after my father died, she stopped cooking other than a dinner. So I would wake up in the morning and I would eat Wheaties. And now I think it was cognitive, my eye issues. I couldn't tie my shoes. I never really learned to tie my shoes. And my friend Michael Bahara from next door, would come over and tie my shoes, and then we'd walk to school. Because in those days, we'd walk to school. We walked large distances. I think it must have been 2 miles to school and back again, unless someone picked you up.
Yeah.
And I'd get home, and my mother would probably be reading. And so I would turn on the TV, and I'd watch a soap opera called Another World. And it was really, I mean, there was no censorship on those shows. Someone was having an abortion. Someone was taking LSD. And it was in black and white. But really, that's what I learned about life. When my father died, he had been sickly since I was 5. And he had I think it was his first heart attack. We were playing together on the porch, and we were rocking together, and he had this massive heart attack. And I can still hear the sound of the heart, and I mean, dramatic. And when he died, in those days, children didn't go to funerals. In those days, children weren't allowed to visit a parent in a hospital, even if they were dying. So through some papal dispensation, or should I say rabbinical dispensation, I got to go see my father in a hospital, and then he died. I had the last heart attack on my birthday. He went off to hospital. 2 weeks later, I went to see him. He died.
But did you see him alive when he went to the hospital before he died?
Yes.
Okay, so there was a goodbye.
And I remember the phone call coming and my mother saying, it's over. It's over, and going into her arms. But because children didn't go to funerals, my delicious cousin Lois, who loved to go shopping too, was dating a guy, a Yale graduate. We're really growing up here in Goldberg.
Yeah.
Lois is dating a Yale man. And not only that, he had a Carmen Ghia. Do you know what those are? Sports cars back in the day.
Yeah.
And so the idea was that Lois and Louis would take Billy away from the funeral, away from the house.
In a car.
With a stick shift, a sporty car. And I got to sit between them because where else could I sit?
Yeah.
And those who were here for perhaps a few messages of homoeroticism, with the gear stiff, with handsome cousin Louis, oh, I hope Lois doesn't listen to this, handsome cousin Louis shifting the gear between my legs. Fagala, this is southeastern Connecticut, and it still is really beautiful there. Hilly and farmlands, you see cows, beautiful. And then the water's very nearby, and we just drove, and we ended up at Lois's mother's house, and Lois's mother, Aunt Esther, made the best brownies. To this day, a brownie still doesn't taste like Aunt Esther's brownies, which cousin Lois finally at age, she just turned 80, told me was a Duncan Hines box recipe. But that keeps you humble too.
Yeah.
Like, these people are, Julia Child was not my mother.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. You loved it.
And I loved it. That's right.
Someone made it.
Right. So put a lipstick on.
Yes.
And you could be Cody. And then we went back into the house. And my mother, from that day forward, was terribly depressed. I mean, severely depressed. So we didn't have that much interaction together.
Right.
Except for friendlies, where she'd pull herself together, pick me up at school, and we go to friendlies, and I'd read Susie Says.
So that's good, though, because your memories, that's the thing that I always think about, and I wrote this down earlier. There's one thing about having a parent not die suddenly, right? Because you have that time, not just time to prepare emotionally, but the whole thing was my dad's power of attorney. So just getting everything moved so that when it happens, I can close all the accounts. And
Right.
the medical bills. He had amputated his leg by that point.
Oh, wow.
Wheelchair, blah, 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 blah. But the other side is you're waiting every day for that call or, again, the pause. It's like you also just, it's interesting when your mom said it's over because
Right.
it
It
that
was.
period's over. There's a relief in that too. It's a conflicting feelings around an illness.
I mean,
And my point being with this is that to have such clear memories of those good times,
yes.
it's so important. Then the 3 years.
It seems urgent to me that I share with you that there were many moments of laughter when my mother, who didn't like to cook, ordered the General Electric rotisserie for the chicken. It became our ritual before she stuck the chicken on the rod that we would dance with the chicken as if it was Fred Astaire on the counter like this. So every time I see a chicken, I want to pick it up and dance with it. As the years went on, I used to come home from boarding school and to pay her bills, to write the checks. And then I go back to boarding. School was only about an hour and a half away. And I would do that. So I had a lot of those responsibilities.
Yeah.
For money, my father, who came with his father, and I just don't know where, they seem to have some gold coins in their bag. Leaving the pogrom in Riga, Russia, my father, the oldest, his father, it's been written about in New Bedford, Massachusetts. There was an old Jewish group in the 1900s. So somehow the grandfather had a brother there and found Goldberg, Connecticut. My father's born in 1895. They invented the car. They had cars and tires. My father got, I don't know how we knew the Firestone, and then the Pontiac. But why we had some money, because I think part of it's like, my mother didn't go to work, was the man who invented the Polaroid camera's father lived in Norwich, Connecticut, Mr. Land, Edwin Land. And they went around to all the Jewish people and said, my son's got an invention. You give a little money. So my father gave a little money to the Polaroids. And I think it really helped shore up his money. And so when he died, my mother had enough money to live. And there was a trust officer named Miss Devine, Mildred Devine. And it was Miss Devine's idea, just speaking what everyone was thinking, that you're not well, Leah. You don't want your child growing up with it. Well, of course I was growing up with it. So off to the boarding school, which I already told you that story.
Right.
So that was how it functioned. If I had to do an arts and crafts project for school, there really wasn't anyone to help. And I'll never forget showing up in 6th grade. We were studying ancient history, and I decided to make a Trojan horse out of styrofoam. And it was, everyone laughed at me, the shame. I mean, shame has been born and reborn in me so many times. You can't shame me now. You could. If there was somebody who might have a naked picture of me, and if they ever did anything with it, I would.
From 35 to 40 years.
Yep. So that's what happened.
It's a relief for little Billy to know that there were these people, your cousin, your aunt, people watching what was happening and just there. Not that they replace anyone, and everyone has their own lives, and this comes to the life of surrogate families.
Mm-hmm.
So you arrived in New York in 1976, so you're like 21, 22 probably. Mm-hmm. Both parents gone. From the New York Times article in 2016, you say it was very clear from the get-go that it was not cool to live here. That's the
right.
Mr. Norwich said he chose the neighborhood because several of his friends' parents lived nearby and he needed surrogate families. Mm-hmm. Both of his parents had died by the time he was 20. Quote, I would tell people I live on the Upper East Side because I'm a runner and needed the park, he said. That's how I covered myself. Mm-hmm. So at this point, you've graduated from Hampshire College. You're in your early 20s. You're an adult.
Yeah.
When most people are, that's their first time to be free, right? Mm-hmm. You're on your own, kid. You're off our books, you know? It's interesting to me that it's, you don't have a family. So this is where that pause button, keeps coming back to my head, that break. I'm not a therapist, but it's like you haven't had that childhood to be at the point of wanting the freedom, right? So who are those surrogate families?
Let me tell you, there's an article. It was one of the most popular articles in the New York Times. When Pilar Veladis was alive and when I was at the New York Times, I would do her back page for her home design issues. They were twice a year. Right after September 11th, 2001, which is, as you recall, quite a time, I wrote an essay called A Key in Sympathy. And it told this story, which is true. When I went to that school in Florence, Italy, I met a woman named Serena Van Ingen. And her mother, she was a 7th generation Vanderbilt, descended from William Kissam Vanderbilt, the brother of the Duchess of Marlborough. So if you watch in the Golden Age, that's how it came down. And these people were very quiet, but they were incredibly glamorous. And Serena, I was in school in Italy. I get a phone call. My mother had gone into hospital. I had to leave the school and come back to the States. And then I went back. But from that time on, whenever I wasn't in her physical presence, but we'd have email, she would write me a letter every week. Wow. And when she returned to the United States, she married at 19, I think. And she and her husband, Brett Costin, who still thrives and is alive out in California, they returned back to New York because it was a junior college. I had to leave. I came back and to be around for the last fall of my mother. And she introduced me, Serena, to someone named Frances Murdoch. And Frances's mother, Mrs. Murdoch, and at that point, I think Iris Russell, later Iris Christ, Serena's mother, they were best friends growing up. And they decided I was never going to be alone again on a holiday.
Wow.
And that So hard to talk about. I'm so grateful for this.
Yeah.
Added to that group was my friend Dora Frost's mother. Dora Frost's mother, Marty Frost, was Bay Paley's true best friend. Went to the Capote thing, and they built a house on Meadow Lane in Southampton on the bay. And instead of grand, they built a Japanese tea house. And so the decorator Billy Baldwin, when I met him later in life, said it was his favorite house in the world. It was so divine. And all they had was Audubon prints and blue and white. I mean, I really learned peace and quiet at home. There was things going on under the surface.
Right, of course.
You know, the feet of the swan were always
You can
flapping.
only control so much.
Right.
So at least,
And my life became a rotating Thanksgiving in Peapack, New Jersey, where I want to tell you my Jackie O story. She used to hunt in Peapack, New Jersey, with the Essex foxhounds, and Mr. Murdoch was the head of the Essex foxhounds, if I recall correctly. He had Pamela, Frances, and Bunny, Catherine Murdoch, who now seems to be in charge of the hunt in Middleburg, Virginia. I mean, I was a Jewish kid. The fanciest word I knew was Polaroid. So I was exposed to this many years later to jump around. I thanked Mrs. Murdoch. Thank you for helping me become what I am today. And she looked at me and she had a wonderful sense of humor. She said, "Ugh, I don't want to take any credit for what you become today. A gossip column? Oh my God." And we roared with laughter. Because remember, like, you don't do gossip columns if you're these people.
I know when we get there.
Right.
That's the interesting thing.
When my mother died, we were sitting Shiva, again, back in the dark ages, the fastest you could get some communication across, other than a telegram, was a special delivery letter. Billy, they need you to sign something at the door. It was a special delivery letter from Serena's mother with a key. And the key fell out, and it said, "This is the key to our home to which you are always welcome."
Wow. Oh my God.
I learned kindness when I needed kindness.
Yeah.
And it is instructed beyond. Inspiring to me to this day, more so. Because now I can sit around and recover from back surgery because I have that much savings. This is, for those who can't see, this is 1/4 of an inch. I do take the obits in the New York Times, the paid obits, and average them up on Sunday to see how I'm doing. I've got to stop doing that. It's very depressing. So that is what happened. So the group expanded a little bit that I met. I'm not bright, just so you know. I might talk a lot, but I'm not bright. When I turned 25, I came into a little bit of my mother's savings. Again, about 1/2 an inch.
Yeah.
No, not even 1/2 an inch. And I thought, I want to be a gardener. And so I moved to Nantucket, not realizing that soon enough in those days, before too much global warming, the ground froze. And I assisted the gardener in warm weather. So I just sat up there trying to write a novel and drinking bourbon. But in the summer that year, I was walking on the beach on the bay side. It was called Narragansett Bay, maybe. And Narragansett's in Rhode Island. See, not bright. Or too many drugs and too poor schooling. So anyway, it was about to thunder. And there was something called the Cliff Beach Club. It's this beach club. And I sort of hid in a cabana. And then the door opened from one of the changing rooms in these private cabanas. And it was this most glamorous woman named Rita Delafield Kipp. And Rita, she was one of those girls who worked at Harper's Bazaar with Bunny Mellon and Dee Dee Ryan and her family, who had found Kipp's Bay. And she really took me in as well. So there was Rita, who I got to call Rita, but always Mrs. Frost, always Mrs. Murdoch, always Mrs. Russell, until Mrs. Russell became Mrs. Christ. I mean, grown-ups. I want to go back to earlier times, because I think it's really me in a nutshell about my relationship with my mother. So my father died in August of 1963, and no discussion of what just happened. Even though for however many days of Shiva, there were these, with all due respect, Alta Cockers coming in to have a service, which in a foreign language I could not comprehend, and their wives sitting in the kitchen saying, "What's Billy going to do when Leah dies?" In November of that year, President Kennedy was shot and killed. And it was on TV, basically. I mean, and so I started to watch death. I saw death on TV. I mean, Mrs. Kennedy, Jackie, she did a tour of the White House. She was a really formidable character in my generation's life and the older generation as well. I had this thing. And then I saw her children. If they can be okay, if Jackie can be okay, my mother can be okay. So I went through life comparing my mother to Mrs. Kennedy. And I have to say it kept me going. And when she married Onassis and the hair changed, you're saluting and you're keeping it together. You're keeping it together. You're not trying. You're not throwing yourself at the gravestone. You are doing.
Okay, well, this all makes sense because what I was thinking about, I'm going to try to make sure I'm not trying to diagnose, but this makes sense because it doesn't feel like you mourned that.
No.
Because when you're still having memories doing these interviews at 50 years old, 60, and the automatic answers to these questions are as an 8-year-old. It's interesting. But let's keep going to the mother theme because you named all women. So it's interesting. From the moment you arrived in New York, living near your surrogate families, and throughout your career, you find these powerful mother figures. From your first boss, Eugenia Shepard, to Liz Smith, to Anna, even to Holland Taylor.
Holland Taylor. Holland's very important in my career because she and I took an acting class together. It was a class to help actors become organized, Filofax. So before she died, Miss Shepard gave me her Filofax. It was a big item. Wow. And I met Holland, and then I was in the New York State Poetry Festival that summer. It was a storefront theater space. I was sharing the space at the event with a feminist, Black, lesbian poet who had a crowd to follow her. I had no one. And so I went first and read my lyrical poetry and whimsical things, basically inspired by Judy Collins' song Albatross. And
of course,
if you know that one, the lady comes to the gate dressed in lavender and leather. That to me was poetry. And a knot of tears around her throat. And Holland bailed me out. I was being jeered. It was like, get the real poet going. And we became lifelong friends. She saw merit in me and potential, and she introduced me to Liz Smith. And that is the career. Yeah. That's the career. That's where the career goes.
So before we speak about these iconic women one by one, was finding these women a conscious pattern, or do you feel it was a natural extension of who you are and who you were searching for? Not just replacing a mother, because it's not that. And now that I've heard the story, you didn't search out these people. It's weird. They came into your life. That is God. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah,
Jill, you talk about...
didn't search out these surrogates.
I wouldn't have been able to explain it to anyone either. I did know I wanted to write a gossip column from childhood, but everything else, to your point earlier, everything else I didn't know.
Right.
Years later, and we'll go right back to this.
Yeah.
And when I got sober, instead of being able to medicate and anesthetize, I started to feel that I had feelings.
I know exactly what you're thinking.
I know you do. And I began to realize that by not having the benefit of any grief therapy, by not talking about it, I carried all that grief, kind of a joke, kind of true. I feel like I've always been a tired person, depressed, but had the chutzpah to build a career around being exhausted. So here I am sober, feeling feelings, tired, always tired, and realizing grief has me. If I'm lucky, I'll get to a stage of life where I have grief. And the work, the meditation, the this, the that, all these things is to really kind of shift it. So I'm now 100, and I am happier than I've ever been. Unfortunately, my body doesn't keep up with me. So that's it. Okay.
Yeah, no doubt. And we'll get into gossip because being a society writer, the worst thing in those moments is being alone with your thoughts. I would walk the long way home to not get home before 7. I could do 7 to 8, and then 8 you're in bed, my routine starts.
Right.
But it's so great. Your job is to go out every night.
Absolutely.
And be around people.
Right.
So, but we'll get to I want to start with Holland, as the other three are more connected to work and move chronologically. I'm going to read your words. With no parents to inform or siblings, my coming out was eventful and relatively easy. I met the actress and playwright Holland Taylor in a workshop for writers and actors in New York in the late 1970s. We became dear friends. In 1979, I visited her at the Chateau Marmont in LA while she was making a TV show. For the trip at the Charivari boutique in Manhattan, I spent a week's dishwashing salary and bought a marvelous periwinkle blue cardigan sweater. Easter Sunday, during my visit with Holland, I wore the sweater to lunch at the home of photographer Gene Howard. On the way there, I asked Holland if she thought people could tell that I was gay. Darling, she replied kindly, and with the comic timing for which she is known. I do think certain sophisticated people will know that you're gay, especially thanks to that sweater. And with that, I was out and have remained out for the duration.
Yes.
Again, a coming out story. Usually you're coming out to your parents.
Right.
So this is one of those, where there's this pause button where your life's not your own. It's not this innocent, your life is going and you are going with it. You didn't have that, right? The beginning and ending of life was there before you began.
Right.
Life.
Yeah.
Right. I just gave myself chills.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
do you see Holland as a mother figure in a way? And you've talked about her friendship and even how it even brought you to that first. Liz, another mother figure, which launched
Yes.
everything that you are today.
Holland is only 12 years older than me. I know it doesn't have to be chronological to have a mother figure, but I saw her.
None of these are.
No, the other ones I'll tell you about. And I mean, and if you, my God, bring up some that I haven't really talked about ever, but I mean, Lee Radziwill for me was the ultimate mother. And I know she was famous for not being supposedly a good mother. She was a great mother to me.
Sometimes that's how it works.
Yes, I get that.
Like we hear that a lot.
A lot. Well, like I've been told. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So Holland, we were kind of infatuated with each other, and there were romantic elements to it. So as best, she could only be my sister. That much I knew. If I have a problem with anyone, like last time I saw Holland, we went to dinner, and she talked to someone else more than she talked to me. So I was fatutzt, and I went and I said, well, of course, you think she's your mother. But then I thought, nah, I think she's my sister. And so that made it even worse. Because if I had a sister, I'm sure we would, Right. Anyhow, I'm seeing her, God willing, on this coming Friday night. And because she's not here a lot in New York. But yeah, no, that was my relationship with Holland. Holland worked very hard. She did all this TV and she was great on stage, but she supported herself doing TV. And she wrote and she took amazing photographs. And that was a really good teacher for me. It's like, I'm in New York. I don't care what you say, I'm in the arts. I just have a master's in fine art and writing from Columbia. I was still in school when I met Holland. And I wanted to do what she says. Be like her, be like her, be like her. How do you have a career? She'd gone to Bennington. She was a New Philadelphia lady who went to Bennington. That was almost a scandal in those days because Bennington was a hip place. And I related to her enormously. She also, in my opinion, is one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen. Which, not to jump around, I met Anna Wintour one night in a restaurant before she was the editor of Vogue because I was tipsy. And she walked in, and I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. And I was waiting for whoever I was having dinner with, and she seemed to be waiting for whoever she was having dinner with. She was standing at the check-in, and I went up to her and said, I wanted her to know I thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world. I think, for me, what happens with these women, these extraordinary women, is first and foremost, I think, they're beautiful. I get a vibe. I see that vibe. Now, they may not always feel beautiful, and the world may not let them be beautiful.
Right.
But I'm the new friend who thinks they're fucking gorgeous.
Yeah. So we're going to jump to the start of your career now.
Jill, I'll tell you about the starting of the career. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. Yeah. Well, at this point, I knew I wanted to be a writer and had for some time. I didn't know how to do that. Like, how do you do that? And the world that I was talking about, the wonderful friends from the school in Italy, they weren't going to become writers. And everyone from Hampshire College didn't go to New York because they were going to go off and save the whales. And I don't mean the English whales, the royal family. And so, again, coming to New York was scandalo. I was a big city hustler compared to the floozy. I wasn't not what people were doing in those days, post-hippie, pre-yuppie. And I came to New York. Serena's husband, Breck, was a teacher at St. Bernard's Day School for boys on 98th Street, I think, 7th, on the Upper East Side. And he got me a job as an assistant second grade teacher for a year. And basically that boiled down to teaching cursive handwriting and being in charge of recess. I love teaching. I thought, well, I can teach and then I can write on my vacations. I can write books on my vacations. That seemed like a good idea. In something of a very hush-hush scandal, I annoyed the woman I reported to. I annoyed her because there was a little bathroom in each classroom, a toilet for the kids. And I got to work early. I mean, it was already early enough. I think you had to be there at 7:45. So I must have gotten to work at 7:15, and I went to use the bathroom in our classroom, opened the door, and she was on the throne. And she was a spinster, and she hated that. And one thing led to another, and the next thing I knew, I wasn't being asked back the next year. She had somehow decided that I was gay. I hadn't come out yet. I had no idea if I was gay. I was very asexual. I mean, I had girlfriends and disappointed every single one of them. So they were like, oh no, we can't have you back. And I remember someone who was on the staff there tipped me off to what was going on. And so when I was getting with the big headmaster, I asked if he could help me get another job, and he made a phone call, and I went to the town school. And the town school's a co-ed school, and whereas St. Bernard's is very organized and traditional, this was like an open classroom. And I loved it, and I got along with everybody. And one of my students was Lizzie Gottlieb, who's a documentary filmmaker now. Her father was Bob Gottlieb, who was the editor-in-chief of Alfred Knopf in those days. Later, he would be the editor of The New Yorker before Tina. And I had written one of my novels, and it was called The Rats Meow. And it was all like science fiction New York. I mean, it was really all over the place. It was like 8 million pages. But he read it, and he gave me some great coaching. I don't quite remember what it was. I remember being very high up in the building, and I was just terrified to be in the presence of Mr. Bob Gottlieb. I don't think I heard a word he said. During that year, I was doing well as this assistant. The head of the lower school, a woman named Galen Fife, called me and said, we think you have a tremendous potential as a primary school teacher. You're wonderful with the kids love you, you're patient. We will pay for you to go to Columbia Teachers College, I think it's called. And if you do that, starting this summer, we will give you the 5th grade homeroom. Huge opportunity. She said, but there's one thing I'd like you to do before we proceed. Now, this is the 70s, and visualization was a big thing. You're supposed to visualize to manifest. And she said, so I'd like you to close your eyes and look down her expression, the highway of life. And I'd like to know what you see. Schmuck that I am. I closed my eyes. Many years later, Anna would say to me one day, you've got to learn to play your cards closer to your chest. I didn't know how to do that. Closed my eyes and I opened them. She said, what did you see? And I said, I know I saw Mick Jagger. And she, because my generation of men, we all did Mick Jagger imitations. Yeah. A scarf on a bed at boarding school, jumping on and off and on and off, Mick Jagger. And she said, I thought so, Billy. I don't think it's in your nature. You want much, much more. Which began, I love her. I finished the school year. Yeah. Said goodbye to my favorite student, Lizzie Gottlieb. And I began years of being unemployed. What felt like years. Plus, they opened Studio 54. I can't tell you the many jobs I had from like 1977 going forward. Right. But I do remember this job. You've heard of Fiorucci? And it was a store Fiorucci was the hippest thing that ever happened in New York, Italian store. Skinny jeans and T-shirts, this angel Cupid logo, and it was on 59th Street, I think, between Lexington and park. And it's just where everyone went. And there was a kiosk that sold Sweet Bee cards. That was a brand. And old magazines, Night Magazine, Interview, every month. Andy Warhol would go to Fiorucci and sign copies and press. And everyone, almost everyone who worked there, as far as I could tell, I'd see later at Studio 54. And so I got a job working in the kiosk. And my boss was the person who managed the whole store was someone named Joey Arias, if you know who I mean. I hope you do. The wonderful downtown performer who was partners with Klaus Nomi. So when they do nostalgia on Instagram, I mean, Joey still performs and he's fantastic. They have drag queens now who do their thing, but Joey was almost a classical singer.
And he worked in the...
He ran it. No, he ran the whole Fiorucci.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And most people were going in there. Everyone was on amphetamines. And the dressing room were big enough so that you could only get the jeans on was to lie on the floor and zip them up. It's a wild place. And I loved that job. I wasn't really drinking too much or taking a lot of drugs. I just took diet pills. And I had a 27-inch waist.
Oh, yeah.
And wore the jeans and sold the stuff, and Andy would come. And then we'd get to work, and Joey would play California Dream by the Mamas and Papas. And he'd say, Leslie, you all ready? California. And then the doors would open, and it was non-stop. Wow. And I'd leave, and I don't remember eating ever in those years. I think once in a while I'd buy a bagel with tuna fish in it. That's all I remember. And I'd go to Studio 54 because Frances Murdoch's dear friend was Susan de Menil before she was married, just Francois de Menil. And Susan's, who was still at Brearley at the time, not quite of age, her best friend was Lacey Ford, Katie Ford's sister, the Ford Agency. And she was dating a guy named Harvey Kirk, who was fabulous, age 20, fabulous, good-looking guy, still is a great-looking guy. And he knew everybody at Studio 54, and we'd all go. We never had a problem. And you'd go there and dance. And so all those pictures that we see in our free time, I remember being there for that kind of stuff. And then after that, the unemployment continued. Got a job washing dishes at one of the, Jill, back in those days, you couldn't really get a cappuccino in New York, except in Little Italy. So there was a place, Sacco Cafe, that opened on 77th in Lexington. And they had cappuccino and sandwiches, and I was the dishwasher. And when Susan Minot, who I knew from dance mixers back in boarding school days, told me she was going to Columbia in fiction and poetry, I looked it up, and I don't know where I looked it up because they didn't have Google. But I found out about it. I must have gotten some research. And I thought, I have to go. I have to go to Columbia. I don't know how I'm going to afford it, but this is what I need. I've got to focus. I've got to do something. So I went up there, and it was like spring, and I asked for an application, said, well, we aren't taking for the fall. I don't know quite what year, 1979. But you can apply for 1980. And I begged. And I said, okay, you can apply. In case someone drops out and doesn't show up. Someone didn't show up, and off I went, and I'll pay for it. Washing dishes. I think I wrote advertising copy for a shopper's magazine called Focus. I also think that another friend from that school in Italy's mother paid my rent for about a year, which was enormously helpful. I mean, the rent was $280 for a studio apartment on 78th Street between Park and Lex with an elevator. And then while I was in graduate school, washing dishes, Miss Shepard kept sending me to a class for secretaries. My friend Chappie Morris, who's very much still around, a wonderful poet. His best friend was a woman named Amy Phillips Penn. She was the niece-in-law of Irving Penn. So she was very well connected. And she was Miss Shepard's real assistant. And she's a wonderful writer. Her other love was horses. And she divorced young Mr. Penn. And she was riding the horses. And she fell off a horse one day and had really some issues and needed to find a replacement for herself in order for her to be able to return to the job once she healed. So she introduced me to Miss Shepard. Now, Miss Shepherd, very few people in this world are shorter than me, was shorter than me. She was getting on in years. She, with her best friend John Fairchild, after World War II, revolutionized how fashion was covered. They started writing about the designers. When they started writing about the designers, Oscar de la Renta was not allowed through, I don't know, this might be apocryphal, or any designer, any Seventh Avenue person, unless you own the company, was not allowed into the front door of 720 Park Avenue, let's say. You had to go around to the service entrance because you were bringing the frock.
Right.
It was very deuxième to be a fashion designer. These people were way more interesting than the people in the apartments. And so they shifted and they created a society. And Miss Shepherd was really doing only fashion coverage in those days. They'd go to the shows, and Mr. Fairchild would assign a review of the collection, but he fed the pages with all the party pictures or the houses.
Because one thing real quick, when I was researching, this came up. It was a piece about her, and the quote was quoting that she once noted, on any given night in Manhattan,
Yes.
16 Stepford and competing societies were in play. So it's interesting because you're about to
Absolutely.
kind of get to this. Yeah.
She actually said that about Southampton. It's just a social life.
Interesting.
Not Manhattan. I've often paraphrased her to
No,
just,
but other people have too.
yeah.
This wasn't even you paraphrasing.
That was a sort of seminal observation of hers. I met Miss Shepherd. She lived at, I can't remember the building, so it's still there, right across from the Carnegie Hall. And her boyfriend at the time, so she really wrote fashion, I think, for the Herald Tribune. But then as the years went on, it was called Around the Town with Eugenia Shepherd. And she did the fashion, but always interested in fashion people. She was Eleanor Lambert's, the best dressed inventor. They were each other's pets. I had several disagreements with Eleanor Lambert. My first was when Miss Shepherd was really failing in health. Miss Lambert came to take her out to lunch, insisting that she go, and they all wore Adolfo suits in those days. But Miss Shepherd had her bedroom slippers on, and off they were going, and I had to stop and say, Miss Lambert, look at Miss Shepherd's shoes. What's wrong with those shoes? I said, they're bedroom slippers. Oh, Eugenia, where are your shoes? But I digress. So what happened was, so I'm helping, really filling in for Amy, and I'm loving it. And Miss Shepherd kind of liked me. And her boyfriend was a man named Earl Blackwell. And Earl Blackwell had something called the Celebrity Register. So before we had IMDb Pro, to find information, you would call Celebrity Register. They did a bulletin every day. It was the only hope. Because if it said Goldie Hawn's in New York, all of her management and reps were included in that mention. It was, she's here, she's appearing in an ad promoting a Revlon. So that's all you had. They were mimeograph sheets, and it was expensive to get those every day. And
Still is.
And every 10 years, he would do something called the Celebrity Register, which was a A to Z, big, thick book of little biographies.
That's
so
great.
When I was helping Miss Shepherd, it happened to be at the same time that they were putting a team together to do the next book. So I'd go to Miss Shepherd in the morning. I was still in grad school. I can't figure out when I went to class, but I went to class.
Right.
I was not absent at that cost, which I couldn't have. The debt I was accruing, I showed up for class. So I'd figure out class. I'd help Miss Shepherd get her column together for the next day. And then I go upstairs. I go out and I was so broke. I'd go out and maybe buy a piece of fruit for lunch, or I'd buy it and then save it for my walk home back up to 78th Street, or I'd take a bus. And once, when I met Helen Gurley Brown, who was the editor of Cosmopolitan, which was the first magazine that, thanks to Liz Smith, I actually wrote for, and she asked me about myself, and she said, where do you live? What do you do? And I said, my favorite thing with Mrs. Brown is to buy a peach in the summer after I leave Earl Blackwell and walk up across 57th Street to Madison and walk up and look in all the shop windows eating the peach. And she said, you're going to do great in New York. I said, I am. And she said, what a survivor. You eat a nice peach, you satiate yourself, you can't afford anything in the windows, but you have a good time. Back to Miss Shepherd.
Yeah.
We were plodding along, and Amy was kind of back in and back out. Eventually, it was Amy all the time. So I had to move on.
Yeah.
But Caroline Kennedy got engaged. And I kind of knew people. So we broke the story. Miss Shepherd, bless her heart, hadn't broken any stories in a while. So even though I'd met Liz Smith socially at this point, she began to pay different attention to me. Like, oh, maybe I can be a reporter.
Or maybe you're going to be her competitor.
Well, she made sure I wasn't, but then I was, and then I wasn't. Yeah. And sometimes we shared a byline. Like when Liz and I shared the byline for Malcolm Forbes' famous 1980s event, Malcolm Forbes' 70th birthday in Morocco. So what happened was that then the Daily News was doing really expanded lifestyle coverage on Sundays. Their divine food editor and writer, Arthur Schwartz, was put in charge of this. Liz had me meet Arthur. When I started writing for the Daily News, and my claim to fame was I did a thing, a 2-page spread. Remember, please everyone remember, there's no internet to compete with. Right. A 2-page spread called How to Be a Social Climber, a touch of crass. How to Be a Social Climber in New York City. And it was like a Monopoly game. If you met so-and-so, you got 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, went to that restaurant, went to that school, wore that clothes, all these things. It was quite fabulous. Yeah. Came out this Sunday. On Monday morning, John Fairchild, who I hadn't met, called me and said, you got to come work for Women's Wear Daily. And really, it felt like days later. And he said, I want you to meet my friend, my editor, Patrick McCarthy, who was my best male friend. He died. I miss him every single day. Then suddenly, Susie, Mrs. Maley, after 25 years on the Daily News, is hired by the New York Post, and she migrates over to the New York Post. And there is scrambling at Daily News. Remember, you couldn't get on Instagram to find out what the Lauren Santo Domingos did last night. Right. You had to read it in a column, or they didn't go out as far as the public was concerned. Yeah. And Liz Smith, or I called her Lizzie. Lizzie got me the job based on this. I'm sure there are other reasons, but she said, there are too many women doing gossip columns. You got to get a boy. And he knows these people. He knows the young. He can be right about the new generation. The same old thing. Get a young person. Yeah. And so a woman named Anthea Disney, who was a legend and then became a longtime Murdoch potentate. She was the editor of TV Guide, and I'm not quite sure what she's doing now. So she hired me, so very reluctantly. And she gave me a book called Headlines and Deadlines. And she said, look, I don't think you're going to know what the hell you're doing, but just be on time. She said, read this book. It'll be very helpful. And she said, and then do me one more favor. She said, when you're working, try and avoid every conflict of interest and do not ever be caught underneath the table, which I took as a sexual thing, which I think she meant, don't be a member of the party. You are not a guest. Right. You are not a guest. And for many years, just like Bill Cunningham, I wouldn't eat. I wouldn't drink. That changed. So I began, and I went from no one knew me to 1,200 words a day, 6 days a week, with my little face on top of the column. And it was explosive. So Patrick took me to lunch and offered me the job of being the eye editor. And I said, no, I think I'm going to go to the Daily News. He said, are you the new Susie? Because it was a big thing in media. And I said, yeah, I guess. Next day, new Susie. And I was launched.
And that's the Vogue feature.
The Vogue feature.
From 1988 that I found. People are talking about Billy Norwich, pretty much introducing you or announcing you as the new Susie.
Absolutely.
Got it. So it's very clear that Liz Smith is probably your biggest mentor. Mm-hmm. But I want to hear more about your friendship, because I'm still so mind-boggled that two gossip columnists that work at rival papers would end up becoming like bosom buddies.
I thank you for asking about Liz Smith, who we called Lizzie, her nickname. A proud Texan from Gonzales, Texas. She came to New York. She wrote the then Charlie Knickerbocker column. Many years later, I would write the Susie Knickerbocker column. Yeah. Thanks to her. When I met her, I was in graduate school, or as Liz would say, a poet. through Holland Taylor. See, I call Liz the mother of my invention and Holland the sister of my invention. So the first thing I noticed about Liz, kind of like Anna, to me, Liz was one of the most beautiful women I'd ever met. Now, I don't think there will be people who might say, Liz Smith, beautiful? Yes, Liz Smith, beautiful. She's brunette, beautiful skin, a character.
You said she looked like your mother.
I did say that. She looked like my mother. She looked like the Queen of England, another love affair of mine. But that comes out wrong. I mean, I honestly thought the 20th century would end with the death of the Queen of England, and I think that is true. And we went right into this strange land called the 21st century, even though it's what, almost 20 years into it. It's always like that. The 21st century is not 1 minute to the next.
Right.
So I loved Liz from the minute I saw her. And she was kind of amused and appalled. And I think I reminded her of her beloved brother, Bobby, who was still living at the time, but someone she cared very much about. We might call them past lives connections, certainly identifications that transcended a regular thing that happens at a cocktail party.
And when you first saw her, were you starstruck by her, knowing the history of social chronicling, you know?
She started her column in 1978. Celebrity journalism was very different then. She wrote a piece, she wrote off for Cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan was very different than always Mrs. Brown, the editor. She did so many pieces on Elizabeth Taylor that she was looking for something new, and they all loved to cook. So Elizabeth Taylor loved to cook. Liz Smith loved to cook, certain chicken fried steak. Richard Burton loved to eat. And so the Burton Taylors invited Liz to come on a European tour with them, a promotion for one of their movies, in which Liz's job would be to just write about what they ate.
That is
And
genius.
find this piece reprinted in the New York Times many years later. But I had read that piece as
Yeah.
I don't know what year it would have come out. I was old enough to appreciate it. So she was a star to me. Plus, she was every day in the New York Daily News 6 days a week. This is before internet. She was a soap opera that I could focus on. I loved the work, like I love Mrs. Maley's work. Now, those two were enemies, big time enemies. They did not get along. Or when they finally had a rapprochement towards the end of their lives, Aileen Maley, she was also Texan. And they were so different what they wrote about, glamour versus more of a Grace Mirabella, go to work type style. And Mrs. Maley with this huge hair and these dresses. And Aileen Maley said, oh, God damn it, I'm going to have no enemies left. Because she was making peace. Unintentionally, she made peace with me. We were competition.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I know, the minute she was sort of in a different thing, or I retired before any of these people from gossip columning. And Liz Smith used to call me, oh, he's annoying. He's such a reformed gossip columnist. Like, holier than thou, Mr. Privacy. And I did privacy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Liz, I want to tell you, so over the years I knew her, and then she got me the job. Did I tell you the story about mentors versus mentees in this? So one day I did something really well in my gossip column. Until then, if they didn't like what I wrote because they didn't know me, they'd call her and complain. And she'd get so sick of it. She'd say, well, call him. So the kind of the Oscar de la Renta story, I mean, they would just call and complain. Or Casey Ribicoff, we were all from Connecticut, formerly governor of Connecticut, then Senator Ribicoff, his wife Casey. She met me at a party, like I was 2 weeks into the job, some party at night, and she called us and said, well, I met your protege last night. I was like 2 weeks into the job, and she met me at some party at night, and she called us and said, well, I met your protege last night. My God, is he nervous? Not only is he nervous about this work, he's making everybody else around him nervous. And so Liz called me up and said, honey, you're making New York society nervous. That's not what you should be doing. She said, don't you have any alcohol in the house? I said, yeah, because I went from 0 to 100, like
Right.
a little face in the Daily News. I said, yeah, everyone's been sending me all the champagne. She said, well, at least just have 2 glasses of something before you go out.
Right. That was her advice.
So the years went on. But at some point, I did something like had a big scoop. It could have even been the Cher thing I told you where Lois Smith, the PR, calls me up, and the next thing I know, she puts Cher on the line. And they put that up on the front page. And I think, so Liz got a little unsettled by that. And I remember telling Holland, I said, I think Lizzie's mad at me. I had a big scoop. And Holland told me the story. So you know the story about the ski instructor who coaches people to get them on the Olympic team. And so he had this one real protege that he loved the best. And the kid's doing really, really well. And one day they're on the slopes and the mentor sees someone like in the most beautiful form down the mountain. And he realizes it's his mentee. And out of his mouth comes, who told him he could do that? We got through that. And the
Yes.
years went on. At Liz's, I was so surprised. I was very close to Liz. As she got really old and infirm, she would call me up and she would say, honey, I have to go out. I need you. And I didn't have any back troubles in those days. I'd give her, I always used to say to people, you like chicken? Grab a wing. And she'd be on my arm. We'd go places I might not have been all that interested to go. And Liz had her thorns.
Right.
She was very awful about Anne, and that was always awkward for me. And then they had their rapprochement. I was glad about that. Liz was part of the campaign against Anna getting the job, and I don't know, they want Grace Marabella to stay put forever. And
Oh my gosh, you know what? Phyllis and Grace Coddington both told me about that period,
right.
how nasty the papers were
The papers were
against Anna when she came up
because
that
people,
exact
the
period.
established fashion community was, I can't, one of the main designers, I'm going to respect Anna's privacy because they all end up
Yeah, of course.
loving each other. But, called up John Ford and said, I got the name, Nuclear Winter. They invented all that.
Grace talked about that. Because what I asked Grace is, when you came back, you're both starting on the same day. Was it like Tom Brady and Bill Belichick getting back together? Was that like the talk of the town? She's like, no, it was these nasty things about Anna.
I like to think that those of us who were there at the time helped people understand how incredible Anna would be for Vogue.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to hear, to even have had that mind that she had to do it, those changes. I mean, it's
Blue jeans and a LaCroix jacket was like getting Congress, both sides, to approve transgender.
Yeah, and what I'm learning is she pushed women forward from fashion as theater, Diana Vreeland, to the beige years of the working woman.
Right.
You don't have to tell a working woman how to dress, and a working woman can dress however the fuck she wants. So show her the theater too. It's
Exactly.
yeah.
And I think in an early on September issue that we did, that and bringing Birkenstocks back, which I told you, to Vogue, uh, uh, my claim to fame is the cover line for the September issue in 1990, maybe. The message is the mix.
Yes, exactly. You go. There you go.
That was such a powerful concept. And that's what I tried to do in my gossip column. And it was not what was going on. When I brought Pat Buckley somewhere downtown for something, it made front page news. Uptown, downtown was a huge.
I mean, we're talking about a time where these changes that we take for granted now were huge things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So having the magazine tell us it's okay is what everyone's looking for.
And promoting it. Now, what people loved about Liz and why she was at everyone's table, and I mean everyone's table, from Mike Ovitz to Brooke Astor, was because no one had ever met anyone who had such a grasp of world history.
Wow.
She was a history buff. And so she would be I've been at dinners, particularly at Louise Grunwald's, where the table is Henry Kissinger, Brooke Astor, Liz Smith, Henry Grunwald, who was the legend in magazine and news journalism. He was longtime editor of Time magazine. And Liz just held her own with these guys. And so her off-duty stuff, she made a lot of mistakes, not factually. Some of her opinions I never agreed with. She wanted to stop talking to me because I loved Lee Radziwill. I never asked Lee about her public life. She was a deeply cozy human being, and we were neighbors of sorts. I could be deeply cozy with her,
Right.
eat with her on Sunday night. Like that was it.
Right.
And I really didn't care about what she wore. I mean,
Right.
I like when y'all get dressed up, but it's not something I can sustain much. And she was very capable of going on and on about courage and all this stuff. But we talked about cozy things, and I never overstepped my bounds. I didn't really need to know what
Right.
I was aggressing, but what Lee thought about Jackie and Jackie thought about Lee, I had a sense of what that relationship was about. But I mean, I'm not writing any books about these people.
Right.
Wish I could. So anyway, but Liz hated Lee. And the closest we ever came to breaking up was when she said, "You've got to stop talking to that awful woman." And I was like, "No, I'm so sorry. I will not stop talking to that awful woman." She had her thorns, but she gave me my voice, literally and figuratively.
And coverage of your speech at her memorial in the New York Times reads, the writer Billy Norwich said he owed his name to Miss Smith. She had been a mentor to him when he was young, broke, and looking to break into the publishing business. Honey, he recalled her telling him, the first thing we need to do is get you a better name if you're going to be a writer. I was born Billy Goldberg in Norwich, Connecticut. One day over lunch, I became Billy Norwich from Goldberg, Connecticut, which is very useful because you get the anti-Semitism direct that way. Over the years, Miss Smith promoted Mr. Norwich relentlessly to colleagues. She also admonished him for misspelling people's names in his column at the New York Observer and the Daily News, advised him to always have 2 drinks. Yep, you told us about that. Before he went reporting at society functions, and stepped in front of Oscar de la Renta the night he was about to knock Mr. Norwich out for something he'd written. Oscar, honey, you can't hit him. He's a Jew wearing eyeglasses, Miss Smith was said to have said. So you've about Liz took you under her wing, helped you get started in the business, and basically told you to change your name. So before we get into the memorial, I want you to tell us more about the name change. So before we talk about her memorial, I want to ask you about the name change. Did you realize that by doing so, did you realize that by changing your name, you were creating someone who never had parents? Billy Norwich never existed as a child. So I want to talk about the name change, and then we'll talk about her memorial. Did you realize by changing your name, you were orphaning yourself almost again because you were creating someone who never had parents, because Billy Norwich never even existed as a child? Yeah, you've called her the mother of my invention.
That's right.
And coverage of your speech at her memorial in the New York Times reads, the writer Billy Norwich said he owed his name to Miss Smith. She had been a mentor to him when he was young, broke, and looking to break into the publishing business. Honey, he recalled her telling him, the first thing we need to do is get you a better name if you're going to be a writer. I was born Billy Goldberg in Norwich, Connecticut. One day over lunch, I became Billy Norwich from Goldberg, Connecticut, which is very useful because you get the anti-Semitism direct that way.
Sure do.
Over the years, Miss Smith promoted Mr. Norwich relentlessly to colleagues. She also admonished him for misspelling people's names in his column at the New York Observer and the Daily News, advised him to always have 2 drinks. Yep, you told us about that. Before he went reporting at society functions, and stepped in front of Oscar de la Renta the night he was about to knock Mr. Norwich out for something he'd written. Oscar, honey, you can't hit him. He's a Jew wearing eyeglasses, Miss Smith was said to have said. So as you've talked about, Liz took you under her wing, helped you get started in the business, and basically told you to change your name. So before we get into the memorial, I want you to tell us more about the name change. Did you realize that by doing so, did you realize that by changing your name, you were creating someone who never had parents? Billy Norwich never existed as a child.
I've thought a lot about this, and I didn't have the insight I have into it now, then, but my gut was really miserable when I did that. What happened was, long before...
Because it's professional, but you could have had that as your professional
And people
name.
did, and it was relatively common. If you had a name that wasn't considered pretty, show busy, everyone was changing.
Actors do it all the time. If you have the name that someone else has, you have to change it. And people do that, and I wonder
Well, it's not, I
if they
can't...
use that name in their homes, too. Like,
Right.
I don't know.
I went years because I could even have a driver's license as William Norwich. I only recently did it because of Feel Free to Laugh, so-called estate. I don't want there to be any trouble.
No, of course.
And everything, my checkbook, my license, my passport said, AKA William Goldberg. So what happened was that I wasn't even doing the Daily News. It was longer. I was still in grad school, but I met Holland, and then Holland would take me with her to meet Liz. And there was a wonderful, wonderful food writer named Lee Bailey, not to be confused with the lawyer F. Lee Bailey back in all the same time. Yeah. And Lee was a real mentor to people like Nora Ephron, of a kind of gracious living that wasn't like, it was more al fresco and more loose and the hair down. I would go on weekends in the summer. He built a house in Bridgehampton. I went with Holland, and Liz was there, and Iris Love. And I mean, Lee was so restricted that you couldn't have potato chips in the house. It was all and so Liz had a trunk full of junk food that we'd slip out and eat the junk food together. I was still Billy Goldberg in those days, but we all became very good friends. I mean, that weekend, Nora was there for dinner one night, Elaine Stritch. Oh my God. Amy Gross was the features editor of Vogue during Grace Bella days, and she commissioned that piece that you talked about in 1988. Oh, wow. And we all got to know each other. But then I was in graduate school, and I had this play that I'd written with Chappie Morris. It was going to be done at the Ensemble Studio Theater. And the play was called In Memoriam. And I don't know if I had to or I wanted to use the opportunity of having something of mine staged at a theater to join a union, because I heard you can get health insurance through that. So I went down to the Dramatists Guild. You didn't go online. So I went down to the office, and they said, what's your name? I said, William Goldberg. And they were like, okay. And they were like, oh, we have 5 William Goldbergs. What's your middle name? And I said, Dave, D. And they're like, oh, we have one. And I was like, well, what should I do to the clerk? Yeah. And they were like, I don't know. So I left and didn't get my application going. And I think that night, Lee Bailey, Holland, and Liz and I were having dinner, and I told them the story. Yeah. And that's when Liz said, well, honey, now that you bring it up, my accountant is called Billy Goldberg. And she said, and then my best friend is the songwriter, Billy Goldberg. She said, you got to change your name. I mean, you got to stand out. So I said, well, what name should it be? And we started to brainstorm. And I had read, sorry, y'all, if I'm dropping these names too heavily. No, that's what we like. I had read that when my friend Serena's grandmother, who was named after her aunt, the Duchess of Marlborough, was Consuelo Vanderbilt Earle. She was married a few times, as one did in those days. And people who were divorced in the 30s, 40s, it was a thing, very social register of them. You took a name. So she took a name of Mrs. Fair. I mean, I don't know who Mrs.
Interesting.
And so I remembered that as we were having this conversation. I said, how about William Fair? And Lee Bailey said, what's a good name for William Fair? So in this dinner where we're doing the work would become so pivotal for the future. Yeah. For as long as I was William Goldberg, Billy Goldberg, they would say, little boy, what's your name? Billy Goldberg. Where are you from? Norwich, Connecticut. Yeah. So my town was as long familiar to me as my name. And I did that. And they were like, great. And I had a level of comfort. I had no idea psychologically what I was doing. Yeah. None. Right. But from that day forward, well, 2 things. You used to be able to write to an editor and maybe go meet them and get an assignment. And when I would write as William Goldberg, I never heard back. But from the day I became William Norwich, I started to hear back. Wow. So that's what I mean by the anti-Semitism directly. We are in a period now where the anti-Semitism is about something else. But in those days, it was just carried bigotry. And it was,
Let's finish up with Liz, and then we will take a break and end episode 1.
so I knew Liz, we were very close. Family. She was like my mother. She was.
Yeah.
But as close as I was to her, I was astounded when I was asked to speak at her memorial. And even though I was the president of the Drama Society at Pomfret School, I had not been on a stage at all. I can't remember the theater, the Majestic, I think. And I was on a roster with Cynthia McFadden, who was the MC, Bruce Willis,
Mm-hmm.
Renee Zellweger, Holland, and Joni Evans, her agent. And I cared a great deal about at least I'm a writer, so I wrote for weeks getting that eulogy to get that piece together. I went out on stage, and I didn't know if you're on the stage because of the lighting, you can't see the audience. So I walked out into a huge box of darkness, and I was terrified. You can tell I probably never had fear of speaking in front of public people, but I didn't have any experience on it, really.
And also, you're in a vulnerable state.
And I got out there, and I remembered Liz telling me she came from a big generation of you toasted anything and anyone at dinner. And everyone had a toast. And she used to tell me, "What the hell is wrong with you, kid? Make a toast." I said, "I have nothing to say." And she said, "Yeah, you do. And you do it for them, but you do it for yourself. Be present. Be heard. Celebrate."
Wow.
And so I did my thing. And if I may say, it reminded me of, you asked me about this in the interview, of my first time doing Shirtaloo, where I killed my mother's throat.
Right.
I did it in such a way that I got laughs at a high drama, which was fine, but everyone liked me. And people were laughing.
Yeah.
I realized I was channeling Liz, that my voice could be her voice, because I could do a slightly different, engaging imitation of the Texan accent.
Right.
She was incredibly candid. She was accused for not coming out in the 80s, but in personal life, we all knew what her business was, her sexuality. We were of a generation that you didn't really write so much about yourself. So I did my thing, and I remember afterwards, people, "Oh, Billy, that was so wonderful. It was so wonderful." And of all the people that meant the world to me, Barry Diller, who was very close with Liz, put his arms around me and he said, "Billy, oh my God, I had no idea," meaning that I had a personality. That's how I interpreted it. Not a bad thing, a voice.
Yeah, a voice.
I hung out with Renee that day. We went to a little lunch afterwards, and it was like almost being with Liz, because Renee was Texan, and I was a different man. So you ask about what did Liz give me? Liz gave me my voice, literally, in her life and at her death.
That's amazing. So since we're breaking this into 2 episodes, I think this is a good place to stop.
Okay.
For episode 1.
Mm-hmm.
We can take a break, maybe get something to eat, or smoke, or anything. And
pass some poisons, Jill. Is it okay to pass some poison?
Yeah. And then we'll get back to it for episode 2.
Oh, I'm thrilled. It's good. It's still about me, episode 2?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. And by God, I mean anything, not, you don't have to get into the God bless you.
Exactly. Okay, so I will see you soon.
I'll see you soon. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back. Okay, that's our show. Thanks for listening to Going Rogue. And be sure to like and subscribe. Today's show is produced by me and Maddie Rosenberg at Radio Free Rhinecliff, with assistance from Maddie Kelly. Special thanks to David Vo for our great graphics and Taras Romanov for our epic theme music. See you next Friday.